Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. You're about to march across the Alps with Hannibal Barca in 218 BC. So yeah, you probably won't survive this either. But let's pretend you're a soldier in the Carthaginian army, and you've just been told you're climbing mountains that make your hometown hills look like speed bumps. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not going to chase you with an elephant over it. And hey, drop your city and the time you're watching this down in the comments. I love knowing who else is awake during these quiet hours. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in late September, somewhere near the Rhône River in what will one day be France. Your pillow is a rock wrapped in moth-eaten wool. Your blanket is a cloak that smells like old sweat and campfire smoke. And breakfast is a handful of barley that tastes like disappointment mixed with ancient regret. Congratulations, you've just joined Hannibal's army, and you're about to attempt one of history's most insane military maneuvers. You glance around the camp. 50,000 men, 9,000 horses, and 37 elephants. Yes, elephants, because apparently someone thought bringing African war elephants over a mountain range in winter was a solid tactical decision. Spoiler alert, it kind of was, but not for the reasons you'd think. Your sandals are held together with strips of leather that have seen better decades. The soles are thin enough that you can feel every pebble beneath your feet, and you're pretty sure one of them is personally offended by your arch. You lick your lips and taste salt and dust. The air smells like horse manure and distant pine trees, with a hint of something you can't quite place. Maybe fear, maybe just unwashed soldiers. It's the kind of smell that clings to your nostrils like a bad memory. You try to stretch, but your back cracks like old wood in a fire. Welcome to the ancient world where chiropractors don't exist and your spine is basically a geological survey of every bad sleeping surface you have encountered. Listen to the sounds around you. The camp is alive with noise, men shouting in half a dozen languages, horses whinnying, the distant trumpet of an elephant that sounds like a foghorn had a baby with a nightmare. Someone nearby is sharpening a sword, the metallic scrape cutting through the morning air like nails on a chalkboard made of anxiety. You might not realize it yet, but you're about to embark on a journey that will make your worst hiking experience look like a pleasant stroll through a park with Wi-Fi and vending machines. Here's a historical fact. Hannibal started this journey from New Carthage in Spain with around 90,000 infantry and 12,000 cavalry. By the time he crossed the Pyrenees, he was down to about 50,000 infantry and 9,000 cavalry. That's a 40% casualty rate before he even got to the Alps. And you know what? The Alps are going to make the Pyrenees look like a gentle warm-up. It's like scrolling through WebMD at 3 AM and realizing your headache might actually be a brain tumour. Except in this case, the diagnosis is definitely fatal, and there's no emergency room to run to. You stand up, joints popping like bubble wrap, and join the morning formation. The centurion, well, not quite a Roman centurion, more like a Carthaginian equivalent who looks like he eats nails for breakfast and complains they're too soft, is barking orders. You don't understand half of what he's saying because your unit is a polyglot mess of Iberians, Numidians, Gauls and North Africans. It's like working at an international airport, except everyone is armed and no one has had their morning coffee because coffee won't be introduced to Europe for another 1,700 years. The word spreads through camp. Today, you march toward the Alps. You've heard stories about mountains, sure. You've seen hills, but these are different. From where you stand, you can see them in the distance. Jagged white peaks that look like the gods took a serrated knife and carved the horizon just to mess with the mortals. They don't look real. They look like something out of a dream after eating bad shellfish. And yet, there they are, waiting for you like a final boss in a video game where you forgot to level up and your save file is corrupted. You get your ration for the day. More barley, a piece of dried meat that might be goat or might be something you'd rather not think about, and a small chunk of hard cheese that could double as a weapon if you threw it hard enough. This is your fuel. This is what's supposed to get you over mountains that have never been crossed by an army this size. It's like trying to run a marathon on a diet of stale crackers and broken dreams. As the army begins to move, you fall into line. The rhythm of marching is almost hypnotic. Left, right, left, right. The sound of thousands of feet hitting the ground in a disjointed symphony. You're surrounded by men who speak languages you don't understand, wearing armour that looks nothing like yours, carrying weapons from a dozen different cultures. It's diversity, sure, but not the kind that comes with team-building exercises and trust falls. This is the kind that comes with survival, and the shared understanding that you're all probably going to die together. But here's the thing, you don't know that yet. Right now, you're just tired, hungry, and wondering why you ever thought joining Hannibal's crusade against Rome was a good idea. Maybe it was the promise of plunder. Maybe it was loyalty. Maybe you just didn't have any better options. Either way, you're here now, and the only way out is forward. Or death. Mostly death. The Rhône River stretches in front of you like a liquid highway going the wrong direction. It's wide, fast, and absolutely not interested in letting 50,000 men and 37 elephants cross without a fight. You stand on the bank, watching the current churn past, carrying branches and debris like nature's own trash collection service. The water is cold enough that you can feel it from where you stand, a damp chill arising from the surface that makes your already questionable wool tunic feel even less adequate. Someone near you mutters a prayer to Tanit, the Carthaginian goddess. You're not sure if he's praying for safe passage or just asking her to make it quick if he drowns. Either way, it's the first honest emotion you've heard all day. The centurion, still barking orders like his vocal cords are made of iron, is organising the crossing. Rafts are being assembled from whatever trees the advanced scouts managed to cut down. They look about as seaworthy as a cheese grater, but complaining isn't really an option when the alternative is swimming in armour. Here's a historical fact. Hannibal actually outsmarted the local Gaulish tribes who were waiting on the opposite bank to ambush his army. He sent a detachment upstream to cross at a narrower point, then had them circle back and attack the Gauls from behind while the main army crossed. It's the ancient equivalent of a military flanking manoeuvre, except with more scrimming and considerably fewer radio communications. Basically, Hannibal invented the surprise party, but instead of cake, everyone got spears. You watch as the first raft is pushed into the water. It immediately starts spinning like a drunk dancer at a wedding. The men on board grab the sides, their knuckles white, their faces frozen in that universal expression of, "I've made a terrible mistake." The raft somehow makes it across, though calling it across is generous. It's more like violently deposited on the opposite bank about 200 metres downstream. Still, no one died, which by ancient military standards counts as a resounding success. Now comes the interesting part. The elephants. You've seen these creatures up close, and they're magnificent in the way that a natural disaster is magnificent. Impressive, terrifying, and absolutely capable of killing you without even meaning to. Each elephant weighs about as much as a small house, and they're not exactly enthusiastic about water. The mahouts, the trainers who somehow convinced these animals that humans were worth listening to, are coaxing them toward rafts that have been disguised with dirt and vegetation to look like solid ground. Listen to the sound of an elephant trumpet echoing across the valley. It's part confusion, part protest, part, "Are you kidding me right now?" Several elephants refuse outright, planting their feet like toddlers in a grocery store. One particularly stubborn elephant named, well, you don't know its name, but let's call it Gerald, decides that if it has to cross this river, it's going to do it on its own terms. Gerald wades directly into the water, trunk, held high like a periscope, and starts swimming. Elephants, it turns out, are surprisingly good swimmers. Gerald makes it across before most of the rafts, looking smug in the way only a multi-ton mammal can. The water smells like minerals and moss, with an undertone of something organic and slightly rotten. You dip your hand in as your turn approaches, and it's so cold it feels like knives. Your fingers go numb almost instantly, and you jerk your hand back, shaking it like that'll help. Spoiler, it doesn't. You're soaking wet, freezing, and you haven't even gotten on the raft yet. This is going well. Your turn comes. You and about 20 other soldiers pile onto a raft that looks like it was designed by someone who had heard about boats but never actually seen one. The wood is green and wet, lashed together with a rope that's already starting to fray. Someone pushes you off from shore, and suddenly you're in the current. The world tilts. Water sloshes over the sides, soaking your feet, then your legs, then pretty much everything. The raft spins, and for a moment you're staring back at the shore you just left, which is not the direction you're supposed to be going. Someone screams. It's not a manly warrior scream, it's a genuine, "I'm going to die and I'm not okay with it" scream. You judge them, but you're pretty sure you're making the same sound. The raft hits something, maybe a rock, maybe a confused fish, and lurches violently to the left. 2 men fall off. You watch them surface, thrashing, getting swept downstream. You hope that they know how to swim. Historical records suggest about half the soldiers in ancient armies could swim, the other half just hoped they'd never need to. The far bank approaches, or rather, you approach it at an alarming speed and an awkward angle. The raft hits mud, tilts, and dumps everyone into knee-deep water that's somehow even colder than you imagined. You stumble onto solid ground, legs shaking, teeth chattering, wondering if frostbite was a thing the ancients knew about. It was. They just called it the part where your toes turn black and fall off. You collapse on the bank, gasping. Your clothes are plastered to your skin, heavy and cold. Around you, thousands of men are going through the same miserable experience. Some are laughing, that delirious laugh that comes from surviving something stupid. Others are silent, staring at the water like it personally betrayed them. The elephants are still crossing, some swimming, some on rafts, all looking deeply unimpressed with this entire operation. By nightfall, the army has made it across. You've lost men, equipment, and possibly several toenails to the cold, but you're on the other side. Fires are lit, though finding dry wood is like finding Wi-Fi in the wilderness. Technically possible, but don't count on it. You huddle close to the flames, steam rising from your wet clothes, and realise that this was just the warm-up. The Alps are still ahead, and they don't care about your feelings. 3 weeks after crossing the Rhône, the Alps stop being a distant threat and become your entire reality. You're standing at the base of what can only be described as nature's middle finger to human ambition. The foothills rise in front of you like frozen waves, each one higher than the last, building toward peaks that disappear into clouds. The air tastes different here, thin, sharp, with a metallic edge that makes your lungs work harder for every breath. It's October now, and the temperature has dropped enough that your breath creates small clouds that hang in the air like tiny ghosts of better decisions. The locals, Gallic tribesmen who live in these mountains, watch your army with expressions that fall somewhere between pity and amusement. They know what's coming, you don't. Not really. One of them, a grizzled man with a beard that looks like it could house a small family of rodents, gestures at the peaks and says something in a dialect you don't understand. Your translator, a nervous Carthaginian who's been looking progressively more terrified with each passing day, swallows hard before translating. He says the mountains eat in armies. Great. That's exactly the motivational speech you needed. The path ahead narrows. What was once a decent track, wide enough for wagons and elephants to move relatively comfortably, has shrunk to a trail that looks like it was designed for mountain goats with a death wish. On your right, the cliff face rises almost vertically, dark rock streaked with ice that glimmers faintly in the weak sunlight. On your left, nothing, just air and a drop that your brain refuses to calculate because the answer would make your legs stop working. You've heard the scouts talking. This section is called the Narrows by the locals, which is the kind of understated naming that makes you wonder what they call the actually dangerous parts. Listen to the sound of thousands of feet shuffling forward, hesitant now, the confident march of the lowlands replaced by a careful 1 foot in front of the other shuffle. Metal scrapes against rock as shields brush the cliff face. Someone's horse whinnies nervously, the sound echoing off the stone walls and multiplying into a chorus of equine anxiety. The elephants, those magnificent creatures that terrified everyone at the Rhône, are now just large, confused animals that don't understand why the ground keeps trying to kill them. One elephant, probably Gerald again, plants his feet and refuses to move. The mahout spends 20 minutes coaxing, pleading, and eventually just sitting there in defeat while the entire column backs up behind them like a traffic jam on the world's worst highway. Here's what ancient historians recorded. Hannibal's army faced not just the physical challenges of the terrain, but also ambushes from local tribes who lived in the mountains. These weren't organised armies. They were guerrilla fighters who knew every rock, every hidden path, every place where a few dozen men could roll boulders down onto thousands. Polybius, writing about 70 years after the fact, describes how the Gauls would attack the column, particularly targeting the baggage train and then disappearing back into the mountains like smoke. It's psychological warfare meets geographical advantage, and you're on the wrong side of both. The cold is different here. It's not the cold of winter-born Nings back home. where you can warm up with movement and fire. This is a cold that seeps into your bones through your feet, climbing up your legs like an invisible parasite. Your toes have gone from cold to numb to that weird stage where you're not sure if they're still attached. You wiggle them experimentally inside your sandals. Yes, still there, but the relationship is definitely strained. The wool cloak that seemed adequate in the lowlands now feels like tissue paper against wind that cuts through fabric like it's not even there. You camp that night on a ledge that's barely wide enough for the army. There's no wood for fires, just scrub brush that burns fast and produces more smoke than heat. The smoke mingles with your breath, creating a surreal atmosphere where everyone looks like they're slowly fading from existence. You huddle with your unit, sharing body heat in a way that would be awkward anywhere else but here is just survival. Someone passes around a wineskin. The wine is half frozen, slushy, and tastes like regret mixed with fermented grapes. You drink it anyway because liquid courage is still courage, even if it's cold enough to give you brain freeze. Above you, the stars are so bright they look fake, like someone scattered diamonds across black velvet. It would be beautiful if you weren't so miserable. The Milky Way stretches across the sky, that river of light that ancient peoples believed was the gods' pathway. You wonder if any gods are looking down right now, and if so, whether they're taking bets on how many of you make it to the other side. You'd bet against yourself at this point. The odds seem generous. During the night, you hear rocks falling somewhere above. Small ones at first, then larger. The sound echoes through the darkness, click, clatter, crash. Each I want a reminder that the mountain doesn't need warriors to kill you. Gravity works just fine on its own. Someone screams, then silence. In the morning, there are 3 fewer men in your unit, and no one talks about it. What is there to say? The mountains ate them, just like the old man predicted. You add their rations to the common pile and keep moving because stopping means dying, and you're not ready for that yet. Emphasis on yet. The path climbs steeper. Your calves burn with every step, a fire that spreads to your thighs, then your back. It's like the world's worst workout, except instead of getting fit, you're just getting dead. Hannibal rides past on his horse, and for a moment you lock eyes. He nods once, a small gesture of acknowledgement, and somehow that makes it bearable. This man led you here, yes, but he's here too, breathing the same thin air, facing the same impossible odds. There's something almost comforting in shared misery. Almost. By midday, you've climbed high enough that looking back makes your stomach drop. The valley below is a patchwork of greens and browns, rivers threading through it like silver ribbons. It looks peaceful from up here, which is a lie. Everything looks peaceful from a distance. You turn back to the path ahead to the next impossible climb and put one foot in front of the other. The Alps aren't going to cross themselves, and Hannibal sure as hell isn't turning back now, so neither are you. Because turning back would mean admitting defeat, and defeat means Rome wins. And after coming this far, after losing this many friends, after suffering through this much misery, you'll be damned if you let those toga-wearing bureaucrats win without a fight. The path ahead twists like a snake with commitment issues. One moment it's wide enough for 3 men to walk abreast, the next it's barely wide enough for one man walking sideways while questioning all his life choices. You're 5 days into the actual mountain climbing now, and the novelty of adventure has worn off completely. What remains is a grim understanding that every step forward is the negotiation with gravity, and gravity is winning. The Gallic tribes who live in these mountains have been watching your army since you entered their territory. You can feel their eyes on you, hidden among the rocks, perched on ridges above, silent as stone. These aren't the friendly Gauls who helped Hannibal earlier in the journey. These are the mountain people, and they view your 50,000-man army the same way you'd view an ant infestation in your kitchen. Annoying, unwanted, and something to be dealt with violently. Here's what the historical records tell us. The local tribes employed guerrilla tactics that would make modern military strategists nod in approval. They waited until the army was stretched out along narrow passes, then rolled boulders down from above, shot arrows from concealed positions, and attacked the vulnerable baggage train before disappearing back into the rocks. Polybius describes how they targeted pack animals specifically, knowing that a panicked mule on a narrow mountain path could cause a cascading disaster. You experience this firsthand when the rocks start falling. At first you think it's natural, loose stone giving way to the vibrations of thousands of feet. Then you see the man 20 paces ahead of you get hit. One moment he's there, cursing at his sandal strap, the next he's gone, swept off the path by a boulder the size of a wine barrel. He doesn't even scream. There's just the sickening crunch of impact, then silence, then the delayed sound of his body hitting something far below. The echo seems to last forever, bouncing off canyon walls like nature's cruelest reminder that you're very small and very breakable. Listen to the sound of panic spreading through the column. Men shouting warnings in half a dozen languages, horses rearing, their hooves scraping dangerously close to the edge. Somewhere behind you, an elephant trumpets in alarm, and that sound, that primal, terrified sound, makes your stomach drop, because if the elephants are scared, what chance do you have? You press yourself against the cliff face, making yourself as small as possible, feeling the cold, rough stone against your cheek. It smells like wet rock and fear, which apparently is a smell, sharp, metallic, like licking a knife blade made of anxiety. The attack lasts maybe 10 minutes, but it feels like hours. More rocks fall, arrows whistle down from above, their fletching making that distinctive whispering sound that means death is flying past your ear at high speed. You watch one arrow embed itself in a wooden shield 2 inches from someone's face. The man holding the shield looks at it, then at you, and his expression says what you're both thinking. This is not what I signed up for. Spoiler alert, none of you signed up for this. Hannibal just promised glory and plunder, and you believed him because you were young and stupid and probably drunk. When the attack stops, the silence is somehow worse than the noise. You can hear breathing, heavy, ragged, the sound of men who have just stared death in the face and watched it wink. The centurion starts shouting orders, getting the column moving again because staying still makes you a target. You step over blood that's already freezing on the rock, dark and sticky, like wine someone spilled at a party that's gone horribly wrong. Your legs shake, but you keep moving because the alternative is dying here. And you're not ready for that. Not yet. Maybe never. But especially not here. The path continues to narrow. You're walking single file now, each step deliberate, placing your feet where the person ahead of you placed theirs because that rock looks stable enough to hold them, so maybe it'll hold you too. Below, the drop is so steep you can't see the bottom. Mist fills the valley like the world ends just past your peripheral vision. It probably doesn't, but right now your brain isn't convinced. Above, you can still see movement. Shadows flitting between rocks, the mountain people tracking your progress like wolves following a wounded deer. You pass a dead pack mule hanging halfway off the cliff, still strapped to its load of grain sacks. Its eyes are open, staring at nothing, and for a moment you feel an absurd kinship with this animal. Neither of you chose this, you were both just following orders, and now here you are, one step away from becoming a cautionary tale carved into a history book that won't be written for another 2,000 years. The mule sways slightly in the wind, and you hurry past before your imagination can complete the thought of what happens when the straps finally break. By nightfall you've made maybe 5 miles. 5 miles that cost you 24 men, twice that many pack animals, and everyone's sense of security. The army camps on a ledge that's barely wide enough, men packed so tight you can feel your neighbour's heartbeat through his ribs. There's no wood for fires this high up, just scrub brush that burns too fast and produces more smoke than warmth. You chew on your ration of dried meat, it tastes like leather that lost a fight with a salt mine. And wonder if this is what the Romans meant when they talked about barbarian invasions. Because right now you feel less like an invading force and more like a very lost hiking group that made catastrophically poor planning decisions. Day 9 of the crossing, and you've entered an entirely new circle of suffering. The air up here is so thin it's basically a suggestion. Each breath feels like you're trying to inhale through a wet cloth, and your lungs are staging a protest about working conditions. Your head pounds with a rhythm that matches your heartbeat. Thud, thud, thud. Your brain is trying to escape your skull through sheer force of percussion. This is altitude sickness, though the ancient world doesn't have a name for it. They just call it mountain madness and hope you don't die. The summit camp where Hannibal pauses his army is brutal in its simplicity. It's just high. So high that snow from last winter still clings to shaded spots, grey and crusty like nature's leftover disappointment. The historical record mentions that Hannibal camped here for several days, giving his army time to rest and the stragglers time to catch up. What it doesn't mention is how miserable those days were, how the cold seeped into your bones until you forgot what warmth felt like, how men developed frostbite in their extremities, how the elephants looked so utterly confused by snow that it would be funny if everything weren't so terrible. You can see for miles up here. In the distance, beyond the remaining peaks, there's a haze that might be Italy. Hannibal gathers the army and points toward it, giving what's probably a very inspiring speech about Rome and revenge and destiny. You can't hear most of it because you're too far back and the wind keeps stealing the words, but the men near the front cheer, so you cheer too. It's what you do in armies. Fake enthusiasm until it becomes real or you die, whichever comes first. Here's a quirky historical detail. During this summit camp, Hannibal supposedly used fire and vinegar to break through rock that was blocking the pass. Ancient historians claimed he heated the rock with massive fires, then poured vinegar on it to crack it. Modern historians debate whether this actually happened or if it's exaggerated storytelling. Either way, it makes for a great image, an entire army stopping to essentially pickling attack a mountain. The temperature drops as the sun sets, plummeting from uncomfortably cold to genuinely life-threatening. You huddle with your unit, sharing body heat in a mass of unwashed humanity that smells like sweat, wool, and desperation. Someone starts singing a song from home, a Numidian tune with a melody that rises and falls like wind through desert dunes. Others join in, different languages creating a strange harmony that's somehow beautiful despite everything. For a moment, you forget that you're freezing to death on a mountain in the middle of nowhere. Then the moment passes, and you remember, but at least the song continues. Night sounds different at this altitude. The wind howls like wolves, or maybe actual wolves. It's hard to tell and you're not eager to investigate. Stars crowd the sky so thickly, it looks like someone spilled salt across black silk. Without light pollution, a concept that won't exist for millennia, the Milky Way is so bright you could almost read by it. Almost, but not quite, which is frustrating because you're bored and cold and a good story would help pass the time. Instead, you settle for counting stars until the numbers blur and you drift into an uneasy sleep where you dream of warm beaches and food that doesn't require rehydration. Morning brings fresh horror, the descent. You stand at the edge and look down at what can only be described as an engineer's nightmare. The path, and you're using that term very generously, zigzags down the mountainside at angles that seem to violate several laws of physics and possibly a few moral ones too. Fresh snow has fallen overnight, covering everything in a treacherous white blanket that hides rocks, ice and death. Men slip on this descent, animals fall, the snow turns red in patches, and you learn to avoid those spots not just physically, but mentally, training your eyes to skip over them like reading a book with tragic chapters you don't want to process. The elephants are especially problematic. These magnificent creatures were designed by evolution for African savannas, flat, warm, reasonable terrain. They were not designed for icy mountain passes that require the agility of a mountain goat and the grip strength of a rock climber. Watching an elephant try to navigate a snowy decline is like watching your grandpa try to use TikTok. Uncomfortable, slightly tragic, and you really wish someone would intervene, but no one knows how. One elephant sits down completely, just gives up, parks itself on the path like a furry boulder and refuses to move. The mahout eventually gets it going again, but the delay costs hours, and hours on this mountain cost lives. Your own descent is a controlled disaster. You slide as much as walk, grabbing onto rocks and the cloaks of men ahead of you, creating a human chain of desperation. Your sandals, already worn thin, provide exactly zero traction on ice. You seriously consider just sitting down and sliding the whole way. But watching someone try that and then disappear over an edge changes your mind. Slow and careful. Wins the race. Or at least doesn't end the race prematurely with a long fall and sudden stop. Halfway down, there's a rockslide scar, a section where the path has completely collapsed into rubble. The army has to rebuild it, which means men with frozen fingers trying to move rocks while standing on a 45-degree angle of death. It takes most of a day. You help because everyone helps. This is survival, not service. And if the path doesn't get fixed, nobody goes anywhere except down the fast way. Your hands bleed. You don't notice until someone points out that you're leaving red handprints on the rocks. Pain is relative when you're too cold and too tired to process it properly. Day 15. You've been marching for 5 months total, 15 days specifically through these godforsaken Alps, and finally the terrain starts to flatten. The descent continues, but it's gentler now, the path widening into something that resembles an actual road rather than a death trap masquerading as a hiking trail. Trees reappear, real trees with green needles that smell like life. The air thickens, becomes breathable again without feeling like you're suffocating on purpose. Italy spreads before you like a promised land, which technically it is, except you're not Moses, and this definitely isn't the story with the happy ending. The army that emerges from the Alps is barely recognisable as the force that entered. Hannibal started with approximately 50,000 infantry and 9,000 cavalry. He descends into Italy with around 25,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. Half his force, gone, lost to cold, falls, starvation, altitude sickness, tribal attacks, and simple despair. Of the 37 elephants that began the journey, most survive, though they're traumatised and probably in need of therapy that won't be invented for another 2,000 years. You made it, which puts you in an elite survivor category, but you don't feel elite. You feel hollow, scraped out, like someone carved away the soft parts and left only the bits too stubborn to die. Here's what the historical sources report. Hannibal's achievement wasn't just military brilliance, it was psychological warfare on a massive scale. Romans considered the Alps an impenetrable natural barrier. The idea that an enemy army could cross them with elephants was so absurd that when news first reached Rome, many senators thought it was a joke or enemy propaganda. By the time they realised Hannibal was actually in Italy, he'd already won his first major psychological victory. You limp into the first Roman settlement you encounter, and the locals flee before you arrive. They've heard stories, an army of ghosts led by a madman with elephants coming over mountains that can't be crossed. Looking at your reflection in the puddle, you understand their fear. You don't look human anymore. You look like something that died in the mountains and forgot to stay dead. Your face is burnt dark from sun and wind, eyes sunken, cheekbones sharp, enough to cut. Your clothes are shredded ruins held together by stubbornness and ice, but you're alive. Against all probability, despite every odd, you survived the Alps. The warmer Italian air feels wrong after so long in the cold. It's too soft, too gentle, like sleeping on a real bed after weeks on rocks, uncomfortable in its comfort. Your body doesn't know how to process warmth anymore. Men actually complain about being too hot, which would be funny if it weren't so tragic. You shed layers of clothing that you swore you'd never remove, peeling off crusted wool like shedding a second skin made of suffering and frozen sweat. Food appears, real food, not dried meat and barley, but bread, cheese, wine that hasn't frozen solid. The army falls on it like starving wolves, which you technically are. You eat until your stomach hurts, then eat more because your brain hasn't caught up with the fact that food exists now, that you're not rationing anymore, that this isn't a dream you'll wake from to find yourself back on that frozen summit. The wine goes straight to your head after weeks of deprivation. You get drunk faster than you'd like to admit and spend the evening laughing about things that aren't funny. The men you lost, the moments you almost die, the sheer absurdity of crossing the Alps with the elephants. But here's the thing they don't tell you about surviving impossible odds. You don't feel victorious. You feel guilty. Why did you survive when others didn't? What made you special? Nothing, probably. Just luck, random chance, the universe flipping a coin and it landing in your favour. You think about the faces of men who fell, whose names you never learned or have already forgotten. They made it possible for you to be here, their bodies literally paving the path you walked. That's not metaphor. In some places, fallen soldiers and animals created stable ground where there was none. They died so you could continue, and there's nothing heroic about that, just necessity wrapped in tragedy. Night falls on Italy, and you lie on actual grass, soft, green, impossibly alive grass, and stare at stars that look different from this side of the mountains. Tomorrow, Hannibal will start planning his campaign against Rome. Tomorrow, the real war begins. But tonight, you're just grateful to be breathing, to be warm, to be alive in a way that you weren't sure you'd ever be again. The Alps are behind you now, a memory already crystallizing into something you'll tell stories about, editing out the terror and amplifying the triumph because that's what survivors do. But right now, in this moment, you remember it exactly as it was. Brutal, beautiful, and absolutely not worth the free t-shirt. You survived Hannibal's crossing of the Alps, Congratulations, now comes the part where you have to fight the most powerful military force in the ancient world. But that's a problem for tomorrow you. Tonight you is just going to lie here on this grass and pretend. That warmth and safety are permanent states of being, even though you know better now. You know exactly how fragile life is, how quickly everything can change, how thin the line between glory and oblivion. The Alps taught you that lesson in the hardest way possible. The Italian plains stretch before you like a green carpet rolled out by a host who forgot to mention they're planning to murder you. After 15 days of frozen hell in the Alps, the warmth feels wrong, almost suspicious, like the universe is setting you up for a punchline you won't survive. Your body doesn't know how to process comfort anymore. You've been operating on survival mode for so long that actual breathable air feels like a luxury you haven't earned. The first Roman patrol you encounter looks as shocked to see you as you are to see them. They're clean, well-fed, their armour actually shines in the sunlight. A stark contrast to your army of walking corpses who smell like death, marinated in sweat and despair. The Romans stare at Hannibal's elephants like they're witnessing a natural law being violated. One of them actually drops his spear. You'd laugh if you had the energy, but laughing requires calories you don't have. Here's what history records. The Romans had assumed the Alps were an impenetrable barrier, especially in late autumn when Hannibal crossed. The Senate had received reports of a Carthaginian army in Spain, then in Gaul. But the idea that Hannibal would actually attempt the Alpine crossing was considered military suicide. By the time scouts confirmed an enemy army descending into northern Italy with elephants, Roman strategic planning had to be completely rewritten. The psychological impact was enormous. If Hannibal could cross the Alps, what else was he capable of? You're camped near the Po River now, in territory controlled by Gallic tribes who hate Rome with a passion that makes your own grievances look like mild disagreements. These northern Italian Gauls, the Insubres and Boii tribes, see Hannibal as a liberator, or at least as a useful tool for sticking it to their Roman overlords. They bring supplies, fresh soldiers, information about Roman troop movements. Suddenly your depleted force of 25,000 is growing again, reinforced by locals who know the terrain and have scores to settle. Listen to the sound of the camp transforming. Men are eating real food, roasted meat, bread that isn't mouldy, wine that hasn't frozen and thawed 3 times. The mood shifts from grim survival to cautious optimism. Someone starts singing again, not the desperate songs from the mountain summit, but victory songs, war chants, the kind of music that comes with confidence and full stomachs. You join in, your voice cracking at first from weeks of cold and silence, then strengthening as the words flow. The elephants, those magnificent creatures who somehow survived a journey that killed thousands of men, are being tended to by mahouts who look almost as traumatized as their charges. One elephant, definitely Gerald, you're sure of it now, has frostbite on its ears. Another lost part of its trunk to cold and infection. They stand in the warm Italian sun like monuments to sheer stubborn will. And you feel an absurd kinship with these animals who also chose to follow Hannibal into the impossible. Your first real battle in Italy comes sooner than expected. A Roman force under the consul Publius Cornelius Scipio, the same one who tried to stop you at the Rhône over years, has tracked you down. He's leading a hastily assembled army, a mix of regular legions and local auxiliaries, and he's confident in that specifically Roman way where they assume their military superiority as a natural law rather than a statistical outcome. The Battle of Treacherous, as historians will call it, is more of a skirmish than a full engagement, but it sets the tone for everything that follows. Hannibal deploys his Numidian cavalry, those incredibly skilled horsemen from North Africa who can turn on a coin and shoot arrows while riding backward, against the Roman cavalry. You watch from your position in the infantry line as the Numidians execute a pincer movement so perfectly it looks choreographed. The Romans, expecting a straightforward cavalry charge, suddenly find themselves surrounded and being systematically destroyed. Scipio himself is wounded, saved only by his teenage son who rides into the melee and pulls his father to safety. That son, also named Publius Cornelius Scipio, will one day be called Africanus, and he'll be the man who finally defeats Hannibal. But that's 17 years in the future. Right now he's just a scared kid saving his dad, and you're part of the army that just sent a Roman consul running. The taste of victory is sweet, literally. You're given an extra ration of wine that night, and it goes straight to your head after months of deprivation. You drink until the world spins pleasantly, until the memories of frozen corpses on mountain paths fade into manageable background noise. Around you, men are celebrating, wrestling, betting on dice games with coins looted from Roman dead. It feels almost normal, except for the part where you're an invading army deep in enemy territory with minimal supply lines and no realistic hope of reinforcements. But tonight, you don't think about that. Tonight, you've survived the Alps, defeated a Roman consul, and you're alive in a way that transcends mere breathing. The Italian moon is bright and full, painting the camp in silver light, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howls. Or maybe it's just a dog. Either way, it sounds like victory. December brings cold again, but it's not Alps cold, it's manageable, merely uncomfortable rather than actively homicidal. You're positioned near the Trebbia River, a tributary of the Po, and Roman forces are massing across the water. The new consul, Tiberius Sempronius Longus, has arrived with fresh legions, and he's eager to fight. Too eager, according to the scouts. Romans are like that. All courage and discipline, but sometimes lacking in the strategic patience department. Hannibal has been baiting them for weeks, sending cavalry raids to harass their camps, burning supply depots, generally being as annoying as possible. It's psychological warfare designed to make Sempronius angry enough to make mistakes. And it's working. You can feel it in the way the Roman army moves, all aggressive posturing and barely contained fury. They want to punish you for having the audacity to invade Italy, and they want to do it now, not later when conditions might be more favourable. Here's what ancient historians tell us. On the morning of the battle, Hannibal sent his cavalry to provoke the Romans just after dawn. The Romans, who hadn't eaten breakfast yet, immediately formed up and splashed across the freezing Trebbia River in full armour to engage the enemy. By the time they reached the Carthaginian side, they were cold, wet, hungry, and already tired. Meanwhile, Hannibal's troops had eaten a warm meal, rubbed themselves with oil to ward off the cold, and were waiting in carefully prepared positions. You're part of the infantry centre, standing in formation with thousands of other soldiers, waiting for the Romans to come to you. The ground beneath your feet is solid, no more ice or no more vertigo-inducing drops, just good Italian earth that doesn't actively try to kill you. It's almost relaxing. The man next to you, a Libyan spearman named something you can't pronounce, grins and says in broken Greek, "Today we kill many Romans, yes?" You nod, because what else is there to say? The Roman army appears across the field, and they are impressive in that terrifying way that well-trained military forces are. Thousands of men moving in perfect synchronization, shields overlapping, spears at the ready, standards flying. For a moment you understand why Rome conquered most of Italy. They were good at this, really good. But Hannibal has a plan, and plans matter more than intimidation. Listen to the sound of battle approaching. First, the trumpets, Roman and Carthaginian, different notes clashing in the air like competing songs. Then the war cries, thousands of voices raised in challenge and defiance. Then the crash of the first contact, shield against shield, metal on metal, the sound of human bodies colliding with force. It's a wall of noise that hits you almost physically, and then you're in it, moving forward with the press of bodies, your spear extended, looking for openings. The fighting is brutal and close. You stab at a Roman soldier whose face you'll never forget. Young, terrified, screaming something in Latin. Your spear finds the gap between his armour plates and he goes down. You don't have time to process it, but you call it because another Roman is already there, shield bashing toward your face. You dodge, barely. Feel the wind of the blow pass your ear. Your shield arm is already screaming with fatigue, but you keep it up because dropping it means dying. What you can't see from your position in the centre is Hannibal's masterstroke. He's hidden his brother Mago with 2,000 men in a ravine along the Roman flank. While the main armies clash in the centre, Mago's force suddenly erupts from concealment and slams into the Roman rear. It's chaos amplified, the sound of an army realising they've been outmanoeuvred, the panic that spreads when soldiers understand they're surrounded. The Roman centre, the part you're fighting, holds longer than expected because Romans are stubborn that way. They maintain formation even as their flanks collapse, even as Numidian cavalry sweep through their auxiliaries like a scythe through wheat. You're locked in a brutal shoving match, your entire world reduced to the 3 feet of space in front of your face, until suddenly the pressure releases. The Romans are pulling back, not in an orderly retreat but in a rout, men dropping shields and running for the river. The Trebia runs red. That's not poetic exaggeration. The water literally turns reddish-brown with blood and mud churned up by thousands of feet. Romans drown trying to cross back, weighed down by armour, exhausted from fighting, pulled under by the current. You watch from the bank, too tired to pursue, leaning on your spear like an old man with a walking stick. Your hands are shaking, adrenaline crash mixing with cold and fatigue. When the casualty reports come in, the numbers are staggering. Romans, approximately 26,000 dead or captured out of 40,000. Carthaginian losses, maybe 5,000, mostly Gauls who bore the brunt of the Roman centre's resistance. You've just been part of one of the most one-sided victories in ancient military history, and you barely have the energy to care. You just want to eat something, get warm, and sleep for a week. That night, camped on the battlefield because moving is too much effort, you lie under Italian stars and think about the Romans who died here. Young men like you, following orders like you, believing in their cause like you believe in yours. The only difference is they're dead and you're not. And that difference is an entirely random chance on which side padded the better general. War strips away all the noble rhetoric and leaves only math. Us versus them, living versus dead, winners versus losers. Winter settles over northern Italy like a blanket soaked in anticipation and fear. After Trebia, the Romans retreat to their cities and fortified positions, refusing to engage in open battle. It's smart tactics. Why fight when you can just wait for the invaders to run out of supplies? Hannibal, understanding this, spreads his army across the region, living off the land, making friends with Rome's enemies, and generally turning northern Italy into his personal forward operating base. You're billeted in a Gallic village whose name you never learn, sleeping in an actual building with a roof that doesn't leak. The locals treat. Hannibal's army, like liberators and meal tickets combined, they feed you, trade with you, and occasionally join your army as recruits. Their hatred of Rome is palpable, generations of resentment against Roman expansion and cultural domination finding expression in supporting the man who dared to cross the Alps. Here's a historical detail that often gets overlooked. Hannibal didn't just survive the winter in Italy, he thrived. While Roman armies hibernated according to ancient military tradition, Hannibal kept his forces active, training, raiding, recruiting. He turned the off-season into a strategic advantage, building relationships with Italian tribes and demonstrating that Roman power wasn't as absolute as Rome claimed. By spring, his army was larger than when he'd arrived, reinforced by Gallic warriors who saw an opportunity to strike back. The elephants don't all make it through the winter. One by one, they succumb to cold, disease, or injuries sustained in the Alps. You watch them die with something approaching mourning, these magnificent creatures who became symbols of the campaign. Gerald survives, because of course Gerald does. That stubborn elephant has made it this far, and apparently has no intention of dying before seeing Rome burn. The mahouts tend to the survivors obsessively, wrapping them in blankets, feeding them special diets, treating them like the strategic assets they are. You spend your days training because idle soldiers become problems, and Hannibal understands discipline better than most generals. The training is intense. Formation drills, weapons practice, simulated battles that leave you exhausted and covered in bruises. But it's also educational. You learn to read Roman tactical signals, understand their formation changes, and anticipate their maneuvers. Hannibal is teaching you to think like Roman soldiers so you can kill them more efficiently. It's pragmatic in that specifically military way, where morality takes a back seat to effectiveness. At night, gathered around fires that actually produce warmth without the constant threat of freezing to death, soldiers tell stories. Some are about home, North Africa, Spain, Gaul, places most of you will never see again. Some are about the Alps, already becoming legend, the horror edited into heroism by the alchemy of survival, and some are about the future. What happens if Hannibal actually defeats Rome? What does victory even look like for an army this far from home? Listen to the sound of winter nights in Italy. Wind through bare trees, the crackle of fire, men's voices rising and falling in conversation and song. Dogs barking in the distance, the occasional cry of an owl, the mundane symphony of life continuing despite war. It's almost peaceful, this interlude between battles, this moment of collective breath-holding before the spring campaign begins. You think about the men you've lost, brothers in arms who froze in the Alps, drowned in the Trebbia, or simply vanished during night marches through hostile territory. You wonder if their families know they're dead, if anyone will remember their names in 50 years, in 100, probably not. History remembers generals and battles but forgets the individual soldiers who made those victories possible. You'll be a footnote at best, a statistic more likely, one of the thousands of anonymous men who followed Hannibal into the jaws of the impossible. But here's the thing, you're still alive. Against all odds, despite every reasonable expectation, you survived the Alps and the battles that followed. You've earned the right to see what comes next, whether that's more victories or eventual defeat. And when the historians eventually write about Hannibal's Italian campaign, you'll be there, invisible in the margins, one more soldier in an army that changed the course of Western civilization. The winter passes slowly, then suddenly it's spring, and scouts bring word that Rome has raised new armies. Not one, not two, but 4 full consular legions, over 80,000 men committed to destroying Hannibal's force. The Romans are coming, and this time they're bringing everything they have. You sharpen your spear, check your armour, and prepare for whatever comes next. The war has only just begun. Spring arrives in Italy like a promise Rome desperately wants to believe. The Senate has had all winter to process the disaster at Trebbia, to make excuses, to convince themselves that Hannibal just got lucky. They've raised new armies, massive ones, because apparently the solution to losing 40,000 men is to throw more men at the problem. The new consul, Gaius Flaminius, is eager, ambitious, and about to make the kind of mistake that gets you a footnote in history books titled, "What Not to Do." You're still with Hannibal's army, which has grown during the winter, thanks to Gallic recruits who see Rome's vulnerability and want a piece of the action. You're better fed now. Your equipment has been repaired or replaced with Roman gear looted from Trebbia, and you've had time to heal the frostbite that turned your toes interesting colours. You're as ready as you'll ever be for another campaign season, which is to say you're moderately terrified, but functional. Hannibal does something unexpected. He marches south. Not toward Rome directly, which everyone expected, but through the marshes of the Arno River Valley. Yes, marshes. You've survived the Alps only to voluntarily wade through swamps. The logic is sound. It's the fastest route south and the Romans won't expect it. But logic doesn't make the reality any less miserable. The water is chest deep in places, cold and stagnant, smelling like decomposition and broken dreams. You march for 4 days and 3 nights without solid ground to rest on. Listen to the sounds of an army crossing a swamp, the constant splash of feet, the sucking sound of mud releasing boots, men cursing in every language represented in Hannibal's polyglot. Force, horses whinnying in distress, their hooves struggling for purchase on submerged routes, and underneath it all, a wet organic squelch that makes your skin crawl. This is what desperation sounds like, set to the rhythm of forward progress. Here's what history records. During this marsh crossing, Hannibal developed an eye infection that eventually cost him the sight in one eye. He rode on the last surviving elephant, possibly Gerald, who at this point has achieved legendary status as the unkillable elephant, because it was the only elevated surface available. Many soldiers didn't make it through the marshes, succumbing to exhaustion, disease, or simply giving up and sinking into the mud. But those who survived emerged in central Italy behind Roman defensive positions, exactly where they weren't supposed to be. You stumble out of the marshes looking like something that died and was reanimated by pure spite. Your skin is wrinkled and pale from days in water, your clothes are rotting on your body, and you're pretty sure something has been living in your hair for the past 48 hours. But you're in Etruria, the heartland of Italy, and the Roman army under Flaminius is scrambling to catch up with you. Hannibal immediately begins destroying the countryside, burning farms, sacking villages, generally making himself as annoying as possible. The strategy is psychological. Hannibal knows Flaminius is an ambitious politician who sees military glory as his path to greatness. So Hannibal marches past Flaminius's army, deliberately avoiding battle, destroying Roman territory while Flaminius watches. It's the ancient equivalent of, "I'm not touching you," while holding your finger an inch from someone's face, and it works. Flaminius, enraged by the insult and pressured by the political rivals in Rome, abandons caution and gives chase. You march along the northern shore of Lake Trasimene in early morning mist. The lake stretches to your right, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting a sky that's just beginning to lighten. Hills rise on your left, covered in trees and scrub brush. It's actually beautiful, in that way places are beautiful right before they become killing fields. The road is narrow here, squeezed between the lake and the hills, barely wide enough for the army to march in column. And somewhere behind you, getting closer by the hour, Flaminius and 25,000 Roman soldiers are following. Hannibal stops. He's found his spot. The hills here have a natural amphitheatre shape and with a narrow valley that opens onto the lakeshore. The only way through is along that narrow road by the water. It's perfect for an ambush, assuming you can hide an entire army in the hills overnight without the Romans noticing. You're given orders to climb into those hills after dark to find a position among the trees and rocks, to wait in absolute silence for dawn. No fires, no talking, no movement. Just thousands of men holding their breath in the darkness, waiting for the enemy to walk into the trap. The night is long and cold. You huddle against a boulder, trying to stay warm, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere down there on the road, Roman scouts have passed by, checking the route, seeing nothing but empty hills and morning fog rolling in off the lake. They have no idea that above them, hidden in the darkness, an entire army waits like a held breath. Dawn comes with fog so thick you can barely see your hand in front of your face. It rises from the lake in ghostly sheets, filling the valley, turning the world into a grey void where sound travels strangely and distance becomes meaningless. You can hear the Romans before you see them, the tramp of thousands of feet, the clink of armour, the rumble of supply wagons, all muffled by fog like someone wrapped the world in wool. Flaminius's army marches into the valley in column formation, stretched out along the narrow road. They're not expecting trouble. The scouts cleared this route hours ago. An ambush isn't really part of the Roman tactical playbook. They fight in open field formations, disciplined lines meeting disciplined lines in honourable combat. Ambush is what barbarians do, and right now, from your position on the hillside, you're absolutely a barbarian. The Romans keep coming. The head of their column is already past your position when Hannibal gives the signal. A trumpet call cuts through the fog, and suddenly the hills come alive. Thousands of men surge down the slopes, screaming war cries that echo off the hills and across the water. The Romans, caught in marching formation on a narrow road, have maybe 3 seconds to realise what's happening before you're among them. The fighting is chaos wrapped in fog and confusion. You can't see more than a few feet in any direction. Romans appear out of the mist, their faces shocked, trying to form defensive positions on terrain that doesn't allow it. You thrust your spear at shapes, pull it back, please, move forward with the press of bodies around you. The sound is overwhelming, metal on metal, screams, war cries, the splash of bodies falling into the lake. Here's what the historical sources tell us. The Battle of Lake Trasmini lasted about 3 hours and was one of the largest ambushes in military history. Of the 25,000 Romans in Flaminius's army, approximately 15,000 were killed outright, including Flaminius himself. Another 10,000 were captured. Carthaginian casualties were relatively light, maybe 2,500 men. The Romans never had a chance to deploy their usual tactics. They were killed while trying to form up, pushed into the lake, or simply massacred where they stood on the narrow road. You see Flaminius die, though you don't know it's him at the time. Just a man in fancier armour than the others, fighting desperately, surrounded by soldiers trying to protect him. An Insubrian Gaul named Ducarius recognises the consul and cuts him down, avenging his people's grievances in one savage stroke. The consul's death ripples through the Roman ranks like electricity. Once the men realise their commander is dead, organised resistance collapses into panic. The fog lifts gradually, revealing the full horror of what just happened. The narrow valley is carpeted with Roman bodies. The lakeshore is red, literally red. Waves lapping at corpses in armour too heavy to swim in. Roman soldiers are still fighting in isolated pockets, surrounded. No hope of escape, just dying slowly, because surrender isn't really an option when you're this deep in enemy territory. You watch some Romans choose the lake over capture, walking into the water until it closes over their heads, preferring drowning to whatever fate awaits prisoners. The taste in your mouth is copper, blood, either yours or someone else's, you're not sure. Your arms shake with exhaustion, that specific tremble that comes from swinging a weapon for hours. Your ears ring from the noise, a constant high-pitched whine that makes everything else sound like it's underwater. You're alive, which puts you ahead of about 17,000 men who woke up this morning and made the fatal mistake of following Gaius Flaminius. The aftermath is brutal in its efficiency. Carthaginian soldiers move through the field, finishing wounded Romans, stripping bodies of armour and weapons, sorting prisoners. You help with this because everyone helps. War doesn't stop for squeamishness. A wounded Roman soldier, maybe 19, grabs your ankle as you pass. He says something in Latin you don't understand, his eyes pleading. You look away and keep walking because what else can you do? You're not a monster, but you're not a saint either. You're just a soldier in a war that stopped being about right and wrong somewhere around the time you crossed the Alps. News of Trasmini reaches Rome like a physical blow. The Senate, those toga-wearing politicians who have been assuring everyone that Hannibal is just a temporary problem, suddenly realise they might actually lose this war. 2 major Roman armies destroyed in 6 months. A foreign army rampaging through Italy unopposed. This is the kind of crisis that makes empires fall, and everyone knows it. You march south with Hannibal, passing through regions that surrender without a fight because why wouldn't they? You're undefeated. You've killed tens of thousands of Romans, and there's apparently nothing Rome can do to stop you. Italian towns start defecting to Hannibal's side, offering supplies and soldiers. Rome's carefully built alliance system, the foundation of their power in Italy, is cracking like old pottery. Here's where the historical narrative gets interesting. Rome doesn't panic. Well, they panic a little. There's a famous incident where a praetor announces the defeat by simply stating, "We have been beaten in a great battle," which causes chaos. But institutionally, Rome does something clever. They appoint a dictator, not in the modern sense, but in the Romans' sense. A single magistrate with absolute power for 6 months, unconstrained by normal political procedures. His name is Quintus Fabius Maximus, and he's about to invent a strategy that will frustrate the hell out of Hannibal. Fabius doesn't fight, he just doesn't. He raises armies, sure, multiple legions totaling over 40,000 men, but instead of engaging Hannibal in open battle, which hasn't worked out well for Rome recently, he just follows him. Everywhere Hannibal goes, there's Fabius and his legions, shadowing him, staying on high ground, refusing to be baited into combat. Hannibal destroys more Roman territory, burns more farms, sacks more towns. Fabius watches and does nothing. It's infuriating. You're part of an invading army that can't seem to force the enemy to fight. Every time you turn around, there are Roman legions on the ridges above you, watching, waiting, just out of reach. Hannibal tries everything, marching past them, threatening their supply lines, insulting their courage with theatrical displays. Fabius doesn't take the bait. He earns the nickname Cunctator, the Delayer, and while it's meant as an insult, it's actually perfect. He's delaying, buying time for Rome to rebuild, train new armies, and most importantly, survive, and you camp in Campania, the rich agricultural region of southern Italy, because if you can't force a battle, at least you can eat well. The army gorges on Italian grain, wine, olive oil, luxuries you haven't seen since leaving Spain. It's almost like being on vacation, except for the part where you're an occupying army deep in enemy territory, with no realistic path to actually winning the war. Because here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. You've won every battle, but you're not winning the war. Listen to the camp at night, and you hear it. Beneath the songs and the laughter, there's an undercurrent of worry. You're thousands of miles from home. Carthage isn't sending reinforcements. Every man you lose is irreplaceable, while Rome seems to have an infinite supply of soldiers. You've defeated them twice decisively, and they've just raised more armies. How many times can you break them before they break you? The summer passes in this strange stalemate. Hannibal manoeuvres, Fabius shadows, nobody fights. It's like a dance where both partners are trying to step on each other's feet, but neither can quite manage it. You start to wonder if this is what the rest of the war will look like. Endless marching through Italy, winning battles that don't matter, slowly bleeding away strength until there's nothing left. One evening you sit by a campfire with soldiers who've been with Hannibal since Spain. They're talking about home, about Carthage, about whether they'll ever see it again. The consensus seems to be no, probably not. You've signed up for something that ends in either total victory or death in a foreign land, and total victory is starting to look less likely by the day. But you're still here, still following Hannibal, because what else are you going to do? Desert? Surrender? Those aren't really options for an invading army. The stars above Italy look the same as the stars above North Africa. but somehow they feel different. Colder maybe, more distant. You pull your cloak tighter and wonder if the Romans are looking at the same stars from their camp on the hills above, wondering the same things. How long can this last? Who breaks first? What happens when the bill finally comes due for all this blood and suffering? The fire crackles, someone tells a joke you don't quite catch, and the night continues its slow march toward dawn and whatever comes next. August in southern Italy feels like standing inside an oven that someone forgot to turn off. The heat radiates from the ground in visible waves, turning the air into something you have to chew before breathing. You're camped near a town called Cannae, positioned on flat plains that stretch endlessly in all directions, perfect terrain for the kind of massive battle Rome has been itching for since Tresmene. And Rome is bringing everything they have. The Roman army assembling across from you is the largest force Rome has ever fielded in a single battle. 8 full legions plus auxiliaries, approximately 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. It's a forest of spears and shields, a sea of red that extends so far you can't see where it ends. They've decided that the solution to losing 2 battles against Hannibal is simple. Bring more soldiers. It's the ancient equivalent of turning up the volume when you can't hear the music, except the music is war, and the volume is measured in human lives. Here's what history tells us. After Tresmene, Rome abandoned Fabius's delaying tactics and elected 2 consuls who promised action, Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus. They raised an army double the normal consular force, stripping Italy of defenders to create this massive concentration of power. The plan was straightforward. Find Hannibal, pin him down with overwhelming numbers, crush him with Roman discipline and weight. What could possibly go wrong? You're part of Hannibal's force of about 50,000 men total, 40,000 infantry, 10,000 cavalry. On paper, you're outnumbered nearly 2 to 1 in infantry, but here's the thing about numbers. They only matter if you can bring them all to bear at once. And Hannibal has been studying Roman tactics for 2 years now, watching how they fight, learning their patterns, identifying their weaknesses. He's about to teach Rome a lesson in geometry that will be studied in military academies for the next 2,000 years. The night before the battle, the camp is unusually quiet. Men sharpen weapons with deliberate strokes, the rasp of metal on stone creating a rhythm that's almost meditative. You oil your spear shaft, feeling the smooth wood under your fingers, checking the binding where iron meets wood. This weapon has kept you alive. Through the Alps, through Trebia, through Tresmene. Tomorrow it needs to do it again, except tomorrow the odds are worse than they've ever been. Listen to the sounds of preparation. Horses being fed extra grain because tomorrow they'll need the energy. Officers moving through ranks, checking equipment, offering quiet words of encouragement or grim acknowledgement. Someone is praying a Numidian chant that rises and falls like waves. Someone else is writing a letter home that he probably won't survive to send. The smell of cooking meat mingles with leather oil and human sweat, creating an odour that's become synonymous with the night before battle. Hannibal addresses the army as the sun sets, painting the sky in colours that look suspiciously like blood and fire. He doesn't promise easy victory. He doesn't lie about the odds. What he does is remind you why you're here, because Rome has to be taught that they're not invincible, that their empire was built on the backs of conquered peoples who deserve better, that sometimes the underdog bites back. It's propaganda, sure, but effective propaganda. And by the time he's done speaking, you're ready to fight an army twice your size. Possibly because you don't have a choice, but also because you believe him when he says he has a plan. The plan, as it's explained to your unit commanders, sounds absolutely insane. Hannibal is going to deliberately weaken his centre, the place where the Romans will concentrate their attack, and use his flanks to envelope and surround them. It's like inviting someone to punch you in the face while you prepare to break their ribs. The success depends entirely on the centre holding, long enough without breaking, on the cavalry winning their engagements quickly, on perfect timing and coordination. It's the kind of plan that either goes down in history as genius or gets everyone killed, possibly both. You're assigned to the centre, the weak point, the sacrificial formation, the place where the plan either works or everyone dies trying. Your unit is mixed Gallic and Spanish infantry, positioned in a convex arc that bulges toward the enemy. You're literally the bait in a trap designed to catch 80,000 Romans. The officer explaining this tries to make it sound like an honour. You're not convinced, but orders are orders. and arguing with Hannibal's tactical genius when he's 3-0 against Rome seems unwise. Dawn comes too quickly. The sun rises behind the Roman position, which means it's shining directly into their eyes. Hannibal positioned the army specifically for this advantage. The wind is blowing from the southeast, carrying dust toward the Roman lines. Every small advantage matters when you're outnumbered 2-1. You take your position in the centre, shield on your left arm, spear in your right hand, and wait for the world to end. The Roman army advances like a force of nature. Disciplined, massive, inevitable. Their front line is incredibly deep, possibly 50 men from front to back, designed to smash through anything by sheer weight and pressure. They're so confident that they're practically jogging toward you, shields up, spears ready, 80,000 voices raised in a war cry that sounds like thunder having a nervous breakdown. And you, standing in the deliberately weakened centre, get to receive that charge. The impact when the lines meet is physical. You feel it through the ground, through your shield, through your teeth. Romans slam into your formation like a battering ram made of flesh and metal. Your line bends backward immediately, exactly as planned. Though knowing it's planned doesn't make it less terrifying. Men are shouting, stabbing, dying. The Roman front ranks are fresh, eager, pushing hard. Your job is to not break, to give ground slowly, to stay alive while the trap closes. Here's what's happening on a tactical level. Though you can't see it from your position in the chaos, Hannibal's cavalry on both wings is engaging the Roman cavalry. On the left, Hasdrubal's heavy Spanish and Gallic cavalry is absolutely demolishing the Roman cavalry they're facing. The Romans, never strong in mounted warfare, are no match for experienced Carthaginian horsemen. Within 20 minutes, the Roman cavalry breaks and flees, leaving Hasdrubal free to circle around behind the Roman infantry. On the right wing, Hanno's Numidian light cavalry is fighting a running skirmish with the Roman allied cavalry. The Numidians are masters of harassment tactics, riding close, throwing javelins, wheeling away before the Romans can respond. It's frustrating, exhausting warfare that doesn't produce immediate results but keeps the Roman cavalry occupied and away from supporting their infantry. Meanwhile, you're in hell. The Roman centre is pushing into your formation, creating a concave shape as your line bends backward. You're fighting in shifts, stab, push, fall back a step, stab again. Your arms burn with fatigue. Blood makes the ground slippery. A Roman soldier's face appears in front of your shield, young, scared, screaming. You thrust your spear into the gap in his armour before he can thrust his into yours. He goes down and another Roman immediately takes his place. This is industrial-scale killing, assembly line warfare, and you're on the wrong end of the production process. But something is happening on the flanks. Hannibal's African infantry, his elite troops, armed with Roman equipment captured at Trasimene, have been holding position on the edges of the formation. As the Roman centre pushes deeper into the Carthaginian line, creating a U-shape, the African troops begin to wheel inward. They're attacking the Roman flanks now, hitting the sides of the Roman column that's pushed so deep into the Carthaginian centre. The Romans, packed so tightly together for their deep formation push, can't respond effectively. They're designed for forward pressure, not lateral defence. As the African troops close in from both sides, the Roman formation begins to compress. Soldiers in the back ranks push forward, not realising the front ranks are now surrounded. The entire Roman army is funneling into a tighter and tighter space. Then Hasdrubal's cavalry arrives. Having destroyed the Roman cavalry on the left, they've circled completely around the battlefield and are now attacking the Roman infantry from behind. The Romans are surrounded, Carthaginian cavalry behind them, African infantry on their flanks, and the supposedly broken centre that suddenly stopped retreating and started pushing back. The word for what happens next is slaughter, but that doesn't capture the scale or horror. 80,000 men packed into an increasingly small space, unable to manoeuvre, unable to retreat, unable to effectively use their weapons because they're pressed too tightly together. You push forward with your unit, stabbing at Romans who can barely lift their shields. It's not warfare anymore, it's extermination. Men are crushed to death without ever being stabbed, suffocated by the press of bodies. Others drop their weapons and beg for mercy in Latin you don't understand and wouldn't grant if you did. The dust is so thick you can taste it, earth and blood and fear. The noise is indescribable. Screams, metal on metal, The wet sounds of spears finding flesh, officers shouting orders nobody can hear. Your world narrows to 3 feet of space in front of your face, to the next enemy soldier, to staying alive for the next minute. Time loses meaning. The sun is overhead, then afternoon, then evening, and still the killing continues. When it finally ends, as the sun sets on August 2nd, 216 BC, approximately 50,000 to 70,000 Roman soldiers are dead. The field around Cannae is carpeted with bodies so thickly that you can walk for hundreds of yards without stepping on dirt. Among the dead are Consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus, both consuls from the previous year, 29 of 48 military tribunes, and approximately 80 senators, a quarter of Rome's entire governing body. You collapse on the battlefield, too tired to care that you're sitting on corpses. Your arms shake uncontrollably from hours of wielding your spear. Your throat is raw from screaming and breathing dust. You're covered in blood, some yours, mostly not, and you can't remember the last time you felt this exhausted. Around you, thousands of men are doing the same, slumping to the ground in poses of absolute depletion. Here's what the historical sources report. Cannae was one of the most complete tactical victories in military history. Hannibal's double envelopment, attacking the enemy from all sides simultaneously, became the gold standard for military tactics. For the next 2,000 years, generals from Schlieffen to Patton studied Cannae, trying to replicate Hannibal's achievement of destroying an enemy force nearly twice his own size. But here's what those history books often miss. This victory didn't win the war. Hannibal's army is now exhausted, depleted, deep in enemy territory with no reinforcements coming. He captured maybe 10,000 Roman prisoners, but feeding them is a problem when you're already struggling to feed your own army. Rome, despite losing a staggering number of soldiers, will raise new armies. They have the population and resources to absorb even this catastrophic defeat. The night after Cannae, Mahabal, Hannibal's cavalry commander, allegedly says, "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but you do not know how to use one." He's urging an immediate march on Rome itself, arguing that the city is defenseless and panicking. Hannibal refuses. Maybe he's right. His army is exhausted and Rome's walls are formidable. Maybe he's wrong and this is the missed opportunity that cost Carthage the war. History will debate this decision forever. You don't care about strategic debates. You're just trying to process what you witnessed today, the largest battle you'll ever fight, a victory so complete it seems unreal, and the sickening knowledge that tomorrow you'll still be in Italy, still far from home, still fighting a war that has no clear end. You've survived the Alps, 3 major battles, countless skirmishes. You've seen things that would break civilian minds, and yet here you are, alive when 70,000 men are not. The survivors share food around small fires, too exhausted for celebration. Someone passes around wine, good Italian wine, looted from a Roman supply depot. You drink until the memories of the day blur slightly, till your hands stop shaking, till you can close your eyes without seeing the faces of men you killed. Sleep comes eventually, deep and dreamless, the sleep of absolute exhaustion mixed with survivor's guilt. Tomorrow, scouts will report that Rome hasn't surrendered. Despite Cannae, despite losing their consuls and a quarter of their senate and 70,000 soldiers in a single afternoon, Rome refuses to quit. They'll raise new armies. They'll change tactics. They'll learn from their mistakes and keep fighting. And you'll have to face those new armies, knowing that perfect victories like Cannae are rare and that eventually the odds will catch up. But tonight, you survived. That's enough. 3 years after Cannae, you're still in Italy. Still marching, still fighting, still technically undefeated in major battles, and yet somehow you're losing. It's like being ahead on points in a boxing match while slowly bleeding out. The scoreboard looks good, but the reality is grim. You have become a nomadic army, moving through southern Italy like a very dangerous, very unwelcome travelling circus. Except instead of entertaining people, you're terrifying them. The problem is simple. Carthage isn't sending help. You'd think that after Hannibal destroyed 3 Roman armies and killed over 100,000 enemy soldiers, the folks back home would be shipping reinforcements, supplies, money, something. But no, Carthage is dealing with its own problems, wars in pool. Spain, political infighting, the usual dysfunction that happens when your government is run by merchant oligarchs who view war as a quarterly expense rather than an existential struggle. Here's what historical sources tell us. After Cannae, Hannibal controlled much of southern Italy. Cities like Capua, Tarentum, and Syracuse allied with him, believing Rome was finished. But Rome, displaying that stubborn Roman refusal to accept defeat, simply raised new armies. They couldn't beat Hannibal in open battle. They had learned that lesson 3 times, so they adapted. They avoided direct confrontation, attacked his allies, and waited for time and attrition to do what their legions couldn't. You're camped outside Capua, one of the largest cities that defected to Hannibal after Cannae. The Capuans thought they were backing a winner. They threw feasts for Hannibal's army, opened their theatres and bathhouses, provided supplies and comfort. It was paradise compared to the Alps, and for a few months your army actually relaxed. Some historians claim that Capuan luxury softened Hannibal's army, that soldiers who'd survived the Alps became lazy in the soft Italian south. Listen to the sounds of camp life 3 years into the occupation. It's different now, less singing, more silence. Men sit around fires staring at nothing, that 1,000-yard stare that comes from too many battles, too many dead friends, too much uncertainty about the future. Someone is sharpening a blade, the repetitive rasp creating a rhythm that's almost meditative. In the distance, a dog barks. These small sounds fill the void where hope used to be. The elephants are all dead now, except maybe 1 or 2 that nobody talks about. Gerald, if he survived this long, would be ancient by elephant standards and probably suffering from PTSD that won't be diagnosed for another 2,000 years. The magnificent creatures that crossed the Alps, that symbolised Hannibal's impossible achievement, are gone, killed in battle, dead from disease, or simply worn out by years of war in a foreign land. Your equipment is a patchwork of origins: Roman armour looted from Cannae, Spanish sword from the original march, Gallic shield from a defector, boots that might have belonged to anyone, and probably came from someone who doesn't need those anymore. You're a walking museum of the you, each piece telling a story of a battle, a dead enemy, or a fallen comrade. The spear you carried from the Alps broke at Trasimene. This one you took from a Roman at Cannae. It's heavier, better balanced, but it doesn't feel like yours. Food is becoming an issue. 3 years of armies living off the land means the land is looking pretty picked over. Farmers have fled or stopped planting. Supply lines are harassed by Roman forces that won't fight pitched battles but are happy to ambush supply trains. You're eating less than you did crossing the Alps, which is saying something because those rations were barely survival level. The taste of hunger is familiar now, a constant companion that makes your stomach feel hollow and your head light. You get dizzy standing up too quickly. Your clothes hang looser than they used to. Around camp, men joke about their new military diet, all dark humour masking genuine concern. How long can an army fight when it's slowly starving? Rome, meanwhile, has figured out Hannibal's weakness. He can win battles, but he can't take fortified cities without siege equipment and reinforcements he doesn't have, so Roman armies park themselves in walled cities and wait. When Hannibal moves to attack them, they just don't come out. It's frustrating warfare, like trying to bite someone who keeps running away, except that someone has infinite resources and you're running on fumes. You participate in the siege of several cities, Nola, Cumae, others whose names blur together. Each siege follows the same pattern. Hannibal surrounds the city, builds some makeshift siege works, and waits for either the defenders to surrender or a Roman relief force to approach. Usually, the relief force appears, Hannibal has to break off the siege to deal with them, and by the time he's manoeuvred them away, the city is reinforced and the opportunity is lost. It's military blue balls on a strategic scale, constant build-up with no release, just endless frustration and wasted effort. You're watching Hannibal, the genius who destroyed 3 Roman armies, being slowly checkmated by Roman generals who learned that the best way to beat him is to not fight him at all. Year 6 of the Italian campaign brings a moment of hope. Tarentum, a major Greek city on the southern Italian coast, has secretly agreed to open its gates to Hannibal. It's one of the most important ports in southern Italy, and controlling it would give Hannibal a secure base, a place to receive reinforcements from Carthage by sea, a strategic anchor for the entire southern Italian theatre. It could change everything. The capture happens at night. Pro-Carthaginian factions in Sambo-side Tarentum coordinate with Hannibal's forces outside. Gates open, soldiers pour in, and by dawn, most of the city is in Carthaginian hands. Except for one problem. The Roman garrison retreats to the citadel, the fortified harbour strongpoint, and refuses to surrender. They have supplies, naval support from the sea, and a position that would cost thousands of lives to assault. You're part of the occupying force, billeted in a Greek house that's nicer than anywhere you've ever lived. The owner fled when Hannibal arrived, leaving behind furniture, mosaics, even a small library of scrolls you can't read but appreciate aesthetically. It's surreal. You're sleeping in a comfortable bed with actual pillows while technically still at war, with a Roman garrison literally visible from your window, sitting in their fortress and flipping you the ancient equivalent of the bird. Here's the historical irony. Hannibal controls Tarentum, but not its harbour. It's like winning a car but not getting the keys. Ships bringing reinforcements from Carthage can't dock safely because the Roman citadel controls the port approaches. Hannibal tries everything. He has ships dragged overland on rollers to bypass the harbour defences, attacks the citadel repeatedly, attempts to starve it out. Nothing works. The Romans just sit there, supplied by sea, a permanent thorn in Hannibal's side. Listen to the sounds of occupied Tarentum. Greek voices speaking a language you don't understand, negotiating with Carthaginian merchants in broken Punic. Market stalls have reopened, selling fish and olive oil and wine, creating a facade of normalcy. But underneath there's tension. Citizens who supported Rome glare at those who opened the gates. Your patrols walk streets where people hate you but are too afraid to act on it. It's occupation, not liberation, no matter what the propaganda says. The local Greek population is divided. Some genuinely support Hannibal, seeing him as a liberator from Roman imperialism. Others collaborated for practical reasons. Being on the winning side seemed smart after Cannae. And a significant minority remained loyal to Rome, meeting secretly, passing information to the garrison in the citadel, engaging in passive resistance that makes governing the city a constant headache. You make friends with a Greek fisherman who provides information about Roman naval movements in exchange for protection from pro-Roman factions. His name is something complicated. You call him Fish because it's easier and he doesn't seem to mind. Fish explains the political situation in Tarentum, the ancient grudges between Greek cities, the resentment toward Roman dominance, and the irony that Hannibal, a Carthaginian, is now playing the same imperial games Rome did. The food in Tarentum is better than anything you've eaten in years. Fresh seafood, Greek wine that doesn't taste like it's been stored in a leather bag for months, bread made from wheat flour instead of whatever grain could be scrounged. Your body slowly remembers what it's like to be properly fed. You gain weight, muscle returns, energy levels improve. It's almost enough to make you forget you're in the middle of a losing war, but you can't forget because every day you see the Roman citadel. That fortress represents everything wrong with Hannibal's situation. He won the battles, all of them decisively, but Rome just won't quit. They lose armies and raise new ones, they lose cities and fortify new ones, they lose 70,000 men at Cannae, and the Senate debates whether to surrender for maybe 15 minutes before deciding to keep fighting. The frustration is palpable. You're undefeated in battle, occupying enemy territory, controlling major cities, and yet you're not winning. Victory keeps receding like a mirage, always visible on the horizon but never actually reachable. Hannibal knows it. His officers know it. And increasingly the soldiers know it too. The question nobody asks out loud is, how does this end? Year 11. You've been in Italy for over a decade and the war has turned. Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal finally brought reinforcements from Spain, crossing the Alps with a fresh army to link up with Hannibal and turn the tide. Except he never made it. The Romans intercepted him at the Metaurus River in northern Italy and destroyed his army. They killed Hasdrubal, cut off his head, and catapulted it into Hannibal's camp as a message. You were there when the head landed. It rolled across the ground, coming to rest near a campfire, Hasdrubal's dead eyes staring at nothing. Someone screamed. Others just stood there, processing. Hannibal looked at his brother's severed head for a long moment, his face unreadable, and then quietly ordered it buried with honours. He didn't speak for 3 days after that. Nobody did, really. What was there to say? Historical sources report this moment as the turning point, the moment Hannibal realised he couldn't win. His last hope for reinforcements was dead. Carthage was now focused on defending Spain and North Africa from Roman counterattacks. Hannibal was on his own in Italy, an army without support, slowly being surrounded by Roman forces that grew more confident with each passing year. The Romans have learned. They stopped trying to destroy Hannibal in open battle because that never worked. Instead, they attacked everything around him, his allies, his supply bases, his recruitment areas. Cities that defected to Hannibal were besieged and recaptured, their populations massacred as examples. Roman armies marched through territories that supported Hannibal, burning fields and destroying infrastructure. It was total war before the term existed. You're part of the retreat now because that's what it is, though nobody calls it that officially. Hannibal is repositioning or consolidating forces or pursuing strategic objectives. But you're retreating, abandoning hard-won cities, pulling back to more defensible positions, slowly being pushed into the toe of southern Italy like water circling a drain. Tarentum falls back to Rome. After holding it for 5 years, Hannibal can't defend it anymore against Roman counterattacks. The evacuation is chaotic, soldiers scrambling to grab supplies, civilians who supported Carthage fleeing because they know what happens to collaborators when Rome retakes a city. You leave behind that comfortable Greek house, those pillows, that brief illusion of civilization. Fish the fisherman disappears, probably dead or hiding or switched sides again. You don't blame him. Survival trumps loyalty when the winning side changes. The march south is grim. You're moving through territory Rome has already scorched, passing burned villages and empty fields. The Romans don't even have to fight you anymore. They just remove everything you could use to survive. It's economic warfare, and it's devastatingly effective against an army that lives off the land. Listen to the sound of an army in decline. Fewer men singing now, many have died. Many more have deserted. The Gallic allies who joined after Cannae have mostly gone home, realizing this war isn't going to end in Roman collapse after all. Equipment rattles differently when it's not properly maintained, when there's no time or materials for repairs. Boots shuffle instead of march. This is what defeat sounds like before it's officially acknowledged. You're down to maybe 30,000 men now, from the 50,000 who crossed the Alps and the 70,000 at peak strength after Gallic reinforcements. Every battle, even victories, costs men you can't replace. Every skirmish and every vesp or ambush, every garrison duty in a hostile city, it all grinds down numbers that only ever decrease. Rome can replace losses. You cannot. It's that simple. The year is now 203 BC. You've been at war for 16 years, in Italy for 13 of them. Hannibal receives orders from Carthage, come home. Rome has invaded North Africa. Carthage itself is threatened. The army that terrorized Italy for over a decade is recalled to defend the homeland, admitting implicitly what everyone already knows. The Italian campaign failed. The evacuation is organized but melancholy. You board ships at the few ports still under Carthaginian control, looking back at Italy. That peninsula where you spent 13 years, where you survived impossible odds, where you won every major battle and still lost the war. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a sword if you had the energy to care anymore. You think about the men who didn't make it, the ones frozen in the Alps, drowned in the Rhône, killed at Trebia, slaughtered at Trasimene, died victorious at Cannae, fell in unnamed skirmishes across 13 years of warfare. You think about what you've accomplished, terrifying Rome, proving an impossible invasion was possible, writing your names into history through sheer audacity and skill, and you think about what it cost, everything essentially, for a war that ends in strategic failure. The ship pulls away from Italy's shore, and you watch the coastline recede. Somewhere on those hills, Roman soldiers are probably celebrating. They outlasted you. They absorbed casualties that would have broken any other nation and just kept coming. That's Rome's real strength, not its legions or tactics, but its absolute refusal to quit no matter how badly they lose. Next stop, North Africa, and one final battle that will decide everything. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight you're just exhausted, sailing across the Mediterranean, wondering if you'll ever feel solid ground under your feet that doesn't want to kill you. The war isn't over yet, but your time in Italy is, and after 13 years, that should feel like something. Relief, maybe, or sadness. But mostly you just feel tired. The North African coast appears on the horizon like a memory you're not. Sure, you want to revisit. You've been gone for 16 years, longer than some of the younger soldiers have been alive. The last time you saw Carthage, you were leaving as part of a conquering army full of confidence and righteous anger. Now you're returning as... what, exactly? Not quite defeated, since you never lost a major battle. Not quite victorious, since you're abandoning the campaign that defined your entire adult life. You're in that uncomfortable middle space where history hasn't decided yet whether you're tragic heroes or just expensive failures. The ships dock at Carthage's harbour, and the city that greets you is changed. 16 years of war have taken their toll, not through direct attack, but through economic strain, political exhaustion, and the creeping realization that Rome might actually win this thing. The Carthaginian people look at Hannibal's returning army with expressions that mix hope, resentment, and the kind of desperate expectation that comes when someone's your last chance and they know it. You disembark with legs unsteady from weeks at sea, stepping onto African soil for the first time since you were young enough to think war was glorious. The air smells different here, dry, dusty, with hints of spice markets and Mediterranean salt. It should feel like coming home. Instead, it feels like visiting a relative's house where everyone's being polite but nobody really wants you there. Here's what the historical context tells us. While Hannibal campaigned in Italy, Rome took the war to Carthage's other territories. They conquered Spain, defeating Hannibal's brothers and cutting off Carthaginian resources. Then Scipio Africanus, that teenager who saved his father at Ticinus, invaded North Africa itself, threatening Carthage directly. The Carthaginian government, facing existential threat at home, recalled Hannibal not because they wanted him back, but because they had no other options left. Hannibal is given command of a new army, hastily assembled, poorly trained, a mix of Carthaginian citizens who've never seen real combat and mercenaries loyal only to their paychecks. It's nothing like the veteran force he commanded in Italy. These men haven't crossed the Alps, haven't fought at Cannae, haven't learned to function as a unified killing machine through years of shared hardship. They're just soldiers, and not particularly good ones. You look at the new recruits during training and feel a wave of something like despair. These kids don't know what they're about to face. They've heard stories about Roman legions, sure, but stories don't prepare you for the reality of standing in formation while thousands of enemies march toward you with the mechanical efficiency of a woodchipper made of humans. You try to teach them what you've learned, how to hold formation under cavalry charge, how to conserve energy during long engagements, how to not panic when things go sideways. But 16 years of experience can't be downloaded in a few weeks of training. The elephants return to the army, 80 of them, fresh and untrained in warfare. They are magnificent creatures, but they're not the battle-hardened animals that cross the Alps. These elephants have never heard the sound of thousands of men screaming, never smelled blood in quantities that turn battlefields into abattoirs. They're basically very large, very expensive question marks that might help or might panic and trample your own forces. It's a coin flip with 4-ton consequences. Listen to the sound of this new army drilling. It's different from the seasoned veterans you fought alongside in Italy. There's uncertainty in the rhythm, hesitation in the maneuvers, orders have to be repeated, formations drift. These men are trying, but trying isn't the same as knowing, and knowing isn't the same as surviving. You stand on the practice field, watching them stumble through drills that your old unit could execute in their sleep, and wonder if Hannibal can pull off one more miracle. The political situation in Carthage is toxic. The same aristocrats who underfunded and undersupported Hannibal's Italian campaign are now blaming him for not winning fast enough, for not marching on Rome after Cannae, for every strategic decision he made while they sat safely at home counting coins. There's talk of negotiating peace with Rome, of accepting terms that would reduce Carthage to a minor power. Hannibal's presence, his reputation, his undefeated record, is basically the only leverage Carthage has left. Scipio Africanus is camped somewhere inland with a Roman army and Numidian cavalry allies under King Massinissa. The Numidians, your former cavalry allies, the ones who won the Battle of Cannae by destroying the Roman cavalry, have switched to peas. Massinissa, who once fought for Carthage, decided that Rome's star is ascending and Carthage's is setting, and made the pragmatic choice that leaders make when survival trumps loyalty. You can't even blame him. You'd probably do the same if positions were reversed. Negotiations happen. Hannibal and Scipio meet between the armies, two generals who've defined an era, facing each other for the first time. You're not present for this meeting, but stories circulate afterward. Hannibal, older now, one-eyed from that infection in the Italian marshes, still sharp but carrying the weight of years. Scipio, younger, confident, a student who learned everything from studying his teacher's victories. They talk peace terms, the talks fail. Neither side can offer what the other needs, and pride, that uniquely destructive force, prevents compromise. War it is then, one final battle to decide everything. The night before the battle, you sit around a fire with soldiers who weren't born when this war started. They ask questions. What was Italy like? Is it true you crossed the Alps? Did you really destroy 3 Roman armies? You answer honestly yes to all of it, and also yes, it wasn't enough. Victory isn't about winning battles, it's about achieving objectives, and Carthage's objective was to break Rome's will to fight. You broke their armies repeatedly, and they just raised new ones. That's the lesson nobody wants to hear the night before possibly dying. Sometimes doing everything right still isn't enough. October 19th, 202, BC. The plain near Zama is flat, open, perfect for the kind of decisive engagement both sides need. You're part of Hannibal's centre, positioned with the mercenary infantry, Ligurians, Gauls, others who've been paid to be here, but whose loyalty extends exactly as far as their last paycheck. Behind you are the Carthaginian citizen soldiers, and behind them Hannibal's Italian veterans, the men who survive 13 years of campaigning, his last reserve of actual competence. Across the field, Roman legions deploy with that mechanical precision that's both impressive and terrifying. They've brought about 35,000 men, and critically they have numerical superiority in cavalry thanks to Massinissa's Numidian horsemen. The tactical situation is inverse from every previous battle. Romans have better cavalry, Carthaginians have better infantry. Well, better is generous for your current infantry, but you have more of it. The 80 elephants lumber forward as the battle opens, trumpeting challenges that sound impressive, until you realise these animals have no idea what they're about to experience. Hannibal is using them as shock troops, hoping they'll disrupt Roman formations and create openings for the infantry to exploit. It's a reasonable plan, assuming the elephants cooperate. Spoiler alert, several don't. Here's what historical sources record. The Romans had prepared for the elephants. They opened lanes in their formation, creating corridors the elephants naturally flowed into, and used trumpets, drums, and javelins to frighten and wound the beasts. Some elephants charged through the Roman lines without causing significant damage. Others panicked and turned back, trampling through Carthaginian cavalry formations and causing exactly the chaos Hannibal hoped to inflict on the enemy. You watch this unfold from the infantry line, and it's like watching an expensive plan catch fire in real time. The elephants that don't flee do minimal damage. The Romans simply let them pass through the lanes, then close ranks and continue advancing. It's a tactical counter so effective it looks easy, which means Scipio studied Hannibal's use of elephants at Trebia and developed a specific counter-strategy. The student did his homework. The Carthaginian cavalry engages the Roman and Numidian cavalry on both wings. This is where battles are often decided. Control the flanks, and you can envelop the enemy centre. But Massinissa's Numidians are the same warriors who won Cannae for Hannibal, and they know every trick in the book because they wrote half of them. The Carthaginian cavalry, outnumbered and outclassed, breaks quickly. They flee the field, pursued by Roman cavalry that disappears over the horizon, leaving the infantry to fight alone. Now it's pure infantry warfare. Your mercenary line advances, meeting the Roman hastati, the youngest, least experienced Roman soldiers, positioned in the front ranks. The fighting is immediate and brutal. You're thrusting your spear at Roman shields, feeling the impact shudder up your arms, pulling back and thrusting again in the monotonous rhythm of close combat. Men scream, fall, die. The line bends but holds. For a moment you think maybe this is working. Then the Roman cavalry returns. Having chased the Carthaginian cavalry off the field, Massinissa and the Roman horse circle back and hit the Carthaginian rear. It's the Cannae manoeuvre, except this time it's happening to you. The encirclement that Hannibal perfected, that destroyed 70,000 Romans, is now being used against his own army. The irony is so sharp it could cut. The mercenary lines collapse. Men break and run, streaming backward through the Carthaginian citizen formations, creating chaos. You're pulled backward in the retreat, trampling over dead and wounded, desperately trying to maintain some coherence. The citizen soldiers try to hold, but they're not experienced enough for this level of pressure. They break too, falling back toward Hannibal's veterans. Listen to the sound of an army disintegrating. It's not the organised clash of battle, but the desperate noise of collapse, men shouting for retreat, officers trying to restore order, wounded screaming, and underneath it all, the remorseless advance of Roman formation warfare, grinding forward like a machine that runs on human suffering. Hannibal's Italian veterans, your old comrades, the survivors of the Alps and Cannae, form the last line. These men know how to fight hopeless battles because they've been doing it for 16 years. They stand firm while the rest of the army breaks around them, creating a shield wall that momentarily halts the Roman advance. For a few desperate minutes, it's like the old days. Disciplined, effective, professional soldiers doing what they do best. But they're outnumbered, surrounded, and fighting an enemy that's learned from every defeat. The Romans press from the front while cavalry hammers the flanks and rear. It's not a battle anymore, it's an execution with pretensions. The veteran line holds longer than any other part of the army, but eventually even they break. Men throw down weapons and beg for mercy in languages the Romans may or may not understand. Some get mercy, many don't. You survive, somehow, through luck or skill or the universe's dark sense of humour. When the killing finally stops, approximately 20,000 Carthaginians are dead, another 15,000 wounded. Roman casualties are around 200. It's not quite as one-sided as Cannae, but it's decisive enough. The Second Punic War is over. Carthage lost. Hannibal, undefeated in major battles for 16 years, has finally been beaten by a general who learned strategy by studying Hannibal's own victories. The aftermath of Zama is paperwork disguised as peace. Carthage surrenders completely. Not just this battle, but the entire war. The dream of Mediterranean dominance. Everything. The peace terms are brutal. Carthage must surrender all but 10 warships, pay Rome 10,000 silver talents over 50 years, enough money to fund entire war, give up all territory outside North Africa, and agree to never wage war without Roman permission. It's not a peace treaty, it's a slow-motion execution of an empire. You're part of the army that returns to Carthage in defeat. The city that once ruled the Mediterranean now exists at Rome's sufferance. The citizens who cheered Hannibal's early victories now blame him for the loss, conveniently forgetting they never sent the reinforcements he requested. Hannibal, the greatest general of the age, is retired from military command at 45, his strategic genius no longer needed because Carthage no longer has an army worth commanding. Here's what history records. Hannibal transitioned to politics, serving as suffet, chief magistrate, and working to rebuild Carthaginian economy and pay the Roman indemnity. He was actually good at it, implementing reforms, fighting corruption, making Carthage functional again. But Rome never trusted him. They pressured Carthage to exile him, and Hannibal spent his final years as a fugitive, moving between eastern kingdoms, advising various rulers in their conflicts with Rome, always one step ahead of Roman assassins. You never see him again after Carthage. You're just a soldier, and soldiers don't get invited to political councils or diplomatic missions. You settle into a veteran's life, whatever that means for a man who spent his entire youth at war. Some days you work in the harbour, loading ships that trade with places you once marched through as a conqueror. Other days you sit in taverns and tell stories to younger men who didn't serve, editing out the fear and adding more glory than actually existed. The taste of defeat is strange, less bitter than you expected, more like exhaustion mixed with relief. You survived. That's not nothing. Out of the 50,000 men who crossed the Alps, maybe a few thousand made it all the way through to Zama and beyond. You're part of an exclusive club nobody wanted to join. Survivors of Hannibal's Italian campaign, the men who did the impossible and still lost. Sometimes you encounter other veterans. You recognize each other by the way you move, the scars you carry, the specific kind of tiredness in your eyes. You don't talk much about the war. What is there to say? Yes, we crossed the Alps. Yes, we destroyed 3 Roman armies. Yes, we lost anyway. The contradictions speak for themselves. Years pass, Rome grows stronger, more aggressive, more convinced of its destiny to rule the Mediterranean. Carthage grows weaker, paying its war indemnity, accepting limitations, slowly fading from power player to historical footnote. You hear rumours about Hannibal, that he's in Syria, advising King Antiochus against Rome, that he's in Bithynia, training armies, that he's still out there, somewhere, refusing to quit even though the war is over. In 183 BC, news reaches Carthage. Hannibal is dead. Poisoned himself rather than be captured by Romans, choosing his own end rather than giving Rome the satisfaction. He was 64 and he'd been running from Rome for 20 years. You sit in a tavern when you hear this, staring at your wine, remembering the man who led you across the Alps, who won impossible battles, who believed that audacity and skill could defeat an empire. Listen to the silence that follows. Not dramatic silence, just the ordinary quiet of a tavern where old men drink and remember. Someone says, he never should have left Italy. Someone else says, he should have marched on Rome after Cannae. The familiar arguments resurface, as if anyone could know the right choice, as if alternative histories matter when the actual history is already written. You think about what you'd tell young Hannibal. If you could travel back to that morning before crossing the Alps, would you warn him? Tell him it wouldn't be enough, that winning battles doesn't win wars, that Rome's real strength is its refusal to stay defeated? Probably not. He wouldn't listen anyway. Great men rarely do. And besides, would you trade those 16 years, the terror and triumph, the impossible victories and ultimate defeat, for a safer, quieter life? You're not sure. Some experiences define you even when they destroy you. The war taught you things they don't write in histories, that courage and fear aren't opposites but companions, that victory is temporary and defeat isn't always final, that following someone into the impossible can be the most meaningful thing you ever do, especially if it fails. That Rome wasn't defeated by Hannibal because empires aren't defeated by generals, they are defeated by time, decay, and the weight of their own success. Rome's time would come too eventually, just not in your lifetime. You finish your wine and walk home through Carthage's narrow streets, past buildings that remember when this city ruled the waves, when Roman ambassadors came here as supplicants rather than masters. The Mediterranean stretches beyond the harbour, the same water you crossed twice, once full of hope, once carrying defeat. Somewhere across those waves, Rome is building its empire on the foundation of victories against Carthage, against Hannibal, against you. But tonight, you're just an old soldier walking home. Your knees ache in the cold, your scars itch. Your memories are sharper than your eyes. You crossed the Alps with Hannibal. You survived Cannae, Trasimene, Trebia. You fought in Italy for 13 years and lost at Zama, and now you're here, alive, carrying the weight of experiences most people can't imagine. It's not the ending you wanted, it's just the ending you got. History will remember Hannibal as one of the greatest generals who ever lived, defeated only by Rome's inexhaustible resources and unwillingness to quit. It will remember Scipio as the student who surpassed his master. It will remember the Second Punic War as the conflict that established Rome's Mediterranean dominance. But it probably won't remember you, the soldiers who froze in the Alps, who stood in formation at Cannae, who survived 16 years of warfare just to lose the final battle. That's okay, you remember, and maybe, in the end, that's enough. Hannibal chose to cross the impossible rather than accept the inevitable. Would you have followed him? Or would you have chosen the safer path and never known whether you could have done the impossible?